Rockefeller started with nothing. What he built was not a product of privilege. It was a product of sequence, not ambition, not vision, not the particular genius of a man who happened to be born at the right moment in the right country. Those are the explanations people reach for when they cannot see what is actually happening. What was actually happening was simpler and more precise. He knew what came first. He knew what came second. And he understood with the kind of certainty that does not require confidence, only clarity, that the order was not negotiable. You have been told the obstacle is capital. That if you had more of it, if you had started with something instead of nothing, the outcome would be different. That belief is not just wrong. It is the specific wrong belief that keeps the sequence from beginning. Capital does not create the sequence. The sequence creates the capital. It has always worked in that direction. And the reason most people never reach the first structural position is not that they lack money. It is that they start building the roof before the foundation exists. This is the blueprint. Not what to feel. Not what to want. What gets built first? What gets built second? And why the order is not negotiable. Every blueprint begins with a structural truth that most people spend years trying to disprove. The truth is this: you are not behind because you started with less. You are behind because you started without a sequence. These are not the same problem, and treating them as the same problem is why the same person can receive a $10,000 windfall and still be in an identical structural position 18 months later. The capital arrived, but the sequence was not there to receive it, so the capital dispersed, as it always does when there is no structure to hold it. Rockefeller understood this at the beginning, not after his first million. Before his first dollar of capital had been deployed, he understood that wealth is not an accumulation problem. It is a sequencing problem. You do not gather enough and then build. You build the structure and the capital follows the structure. The structure is the attractor. Without it, capital moves through a position like water through sand, present for a moment and gone, and the ground is no more solid than it was before. The people who absorbed what came before this, the treadmill, the refinery threshold, the drainage habits, the idle capital trap, the extraction illusion, understand now that their position is not a personal failure. It is structural. The system is running correctly. It is simply running against them because they have not yet built the thing that makes it run in their direction. That thing is not a product. It is not an investment. It is not a side income. It is a sequence, and the sequence has an order. 3 stages. No stage can be skipped. No stage can be reversed. What gets built first determines whether what comes second can stand at all. This is the blueprint. The 3 stages are its chapters, and the first stage has a name. A blueprint does not begin at the finish line. It begins where the ground is bare, before any structure exists, before any material has been delivered. The architect does not stand at an empty lot and feel the absence of the building. He examines the ground. He measures the soil. He determines what the site can hold before he decides what will be built on it. Because the wrong foundation in the wrong ground is not a starting point. It is a liability. You are standing on bare ground. The zero protocol is the first stage of the blueprint. It is not about getting to zero debt or zero distraction or zero bad habits. It is about understanding what zero actually is, structurally, and why the correct response to it is not acceleration. It is examination. Most people at zero accelerate. They find the highest paying option available to them and they take it. They optimize for income because income feels like the solution to the problem of having none. But income is not the foundation. Income is the material that will eventually go into the foundation, if and only if the foundation position has first been identified. Without that identification, the income arrives, gets consumed by the existing structure of the person's financial life, and leaves no trace. This is not a discipline failure. It is a sequencing failure. The zero protocol contains 3 components. They are sequential. The second cannot begin until the first is complete. The third cannot begin until the second is complete. Component 1. The ledger. Before a single structural decision is made, the ledger must be read accurately, not approximately. Not in the optimistic version the mind naturally constructs. Accurately. The ledger has 2 columns. The left column is every dollar that enters your position per month. Not per year, not per week, per month. The right column is every dollar that leaves. Not every dollar you remember leaving. Every dollar that actually leaves. This requires 30 days of tracking, not estimation. Most people have never done this. They believe they know what the numbers are. They do not. The gap between what people believe they spend and what they actually spend is, on average, between 20 and 40%. That gap is not a moral failure. It is a visibility failure. You cannot correct a position you cannot see. When the ledger is complete, 30 days, every transaction, both columns, you will have something that most people in your position do not have. A ground-level reading of the structure as it actually exists. Not as it should be. Not as you intend it to be, as it is. This is the soil examination. The architect cannot design a foundation without knowing what the ground beneath it can bear. The ledger tells you what the ground can bear. What you will find in most cases is that the right column is consuming between 95 and 105% of the left column, sometimes more. This means there is no structural margin, no excess material available to build with. Not because the income is too low, though in some cases that is also true, but because the structure has no gap in it. Capital enters and capital leaves with a precision that feels like it was engineered. It was by the existing structure, not by you. The treadmill does not have gaps. It is designed not to. The ledger does not fix this, but it makes the gap visible. And a visible gap is the first structural fact you possess. That fact is the beginning of the blueprint. Component 2, the cut. The second component of the zero protocol is not budgeting. It is surgical. A budget is a plan to manage the existing structure. The cut is a decision to reduce the structure's consumption by a specific measurable amount, with the explicit purpose of creating a structural margin. Not a comfortable margin. Not a margin that feels sustainable. A margin of no less than $300 per month for someone earning below $3,000 per month, and no less than 10% of net income for someone earning above that threshold. This number is not arbitrary. It is the minimum amount from which compounding mechanics can begin to operate with any structural meaning over a 12-month period. Below that threshold, the accumulation is present but not yet load-bearing. The foundation requires weight to begin setting. $300 per month over 12 months is $3,600. That number has structural implications. $80 per month over 12 months is $960. That number does not. The cut is not about sacrifice. It is about redirecting material from the consumption column to the foundation column. The material was already there. It was moving in the wrong direction. The cut changes the direction. What gets cut is not determined by what is easiest. It is determined by what produces the required margin with the fewest total decisions. In most ledgers, 2 to 3 line items account for the majority of discretionary outflow. Identifying and eliminating or substantially reducing those 2 or 3 items is faster and more structurally durable than making 12 small adjustments across the entire ledger. Small adjustments require ongoing discipline. Large structural cuts require only one decision. One decision is more reliable than 12. This is Rockefeller's model. He did not run Standard Oil by making hundreds of small cost-saving adjustments each month. He identified the single structural inefficiency, independent refinery ownership, and eliminated it at scale. One decision. Structural consequence. The details followed. Your ledger has a version of the same principle. 2 or 3 line items are carrying most of the structural waste. Find them. Cut them. Do it once. Do not negotiate with them. When the cut is made and the margin is confirmed, not projected, confirmed, component 2 is complete. The structural margin now exists. This is the cleared foundation site. The ground has been prepared. Component 3, the hold. The margin exists. The first instinct is to deploy it. This instinct is wrong. Component 3 is the hold. And it is the component most people skip, which is why most people never complete the zero protocol and instead enter a cycle where the margin is created and then consumed by the next structural disruption before it can become anything. The hold is exactly what it sounds like. The margin is not invested. It is not spent on a productive purpose. It is not used to reduce debt aggressively, not yet. It is held in the most liquid, zero-return position available, a savings account, for 6 months. The reason for this is structural, not financial. The hold period does 2 things simultaneously. First, it calibrates the system. 6 months of consistent margin production proves that the cut was real and durable, not an optimistic projection. Many people can maintain a cut for 30 days, 60. Fewer can maintain it through a car repair, an unexpected bill, a change in circumstances. 6 months of confirmed margin production is the proof that the foundation site is stable. The ground is not shifting. the foundation can be poured. Second, the hold period creates the first genuine capital reserve of your structural life. Not savings in the consumer sense, a buffer against spending, capital in the structural sense, material that is now available for deployment into a position. At the end of 6 months at $300 per month, the reserve is $1,800. At the end of 6 months, at 10% of a $4,000 monthly net income, it is $2,400. These numbers do not feel significant. They are the most significant numbers of the sequence because they are the first numbers produced by a structure you built rather than inherited. Rockefeller's first ledger entry of any structural consequence was $3.57, a record he kept in a small black book for the rest of his life. Not because the number was large, because it was the first number produced by a structure he had built deliberately. It was the proof that the structure worked. The scale came later. The proof of mechanism came first. At the end of 6 months, if the margin has been confirmed and the reserve is present, the zero protocol is complete. The foundation site has been examined. The ground is stable. The material is on site. The next stage does not begin with enthusiasm. It begins with a question that the blueprint answers before you have the chance to ask it incorrectly. The question is, what gets built here first? The answer is not determined by preference. It is determined by the sequence. A blueprint does not give you options. It gives you an order. Every structural decision in a building's construction has a predecessor, a condition that must exist before the next element can be placed. The foundation sets before the walls rise. The walls stand before the roof is loaded. This is not a recommendation. It is physics. Deviate from the sequence and the structure does not become slower to build. It becomes impossible to complete. A wall without a foundation does not stand indefinitely. It falls at the first load. The sequence law states that every structural decision in the accumulation of capital follows the same logic. There is an order. The order is not negotiable. And the most common, most costly mistake made by people who have just completed the zero protocol, who now have a margin, who now have a reserve, who now have more structural clarity than they have ever had, is to deviate from the sequence at the exact moment the sequence matters most. The deviation always takes the same form. It is investment. The reserve exists. The person looks at the reserve and concludes that the natural next step is to deploy it into an index fund, into crypto, into a business idea that has been in their mind for 3 years, into something that will make the $2,400 become something larger. This conclusion is rational. It is also premature, because the sequence has a stage that precedes deployment, and skipping it produces a specific structural failure that is not immediately visible. The stage that precedes deployment is position. The first law, position before deployment. Capital deployed without a position is not investing. It is dispersal. A position is not a job. A position is not a business. A position is the structural location from which capital can compound without requiring your continuous presence to do so. Rockefeller's position was not his job as a bookkeeper. His position was the refinery, the structure that converted raw material into refined product at a margin. His job produced income. The refinery produced compounding. These are not the same mechanism. The reason the sequence requires position before deployment is this: capital deployed into the wrong position does not simply underperform. It trains the person deploying it to believe that capital deployment is inherently unreliable, that the market is too volatile, that timing matters too much, that the risk is not worth the result. This belief is a structural consequence of premature deployment. The capital went into a position that had not yet been established, and the instability of that position was attributed to the nature of investing rather than to the absence of a foundation. The person then either exits the position at a loss and returns to the consumer structure, or they hold the position through its volatility while the psychological cost of the uncertainty drains the energy that should be going into building the actual foundation. Either outcome is a structural failure produced by a sequencing error. Position is not established by reading. It is not established by research. It is established by the specific structural act of matching the capital reserve to the lowest friction, most structurally appropriate position that the current reserve can enter without requiring leverage or expertise that does not yet exist. For most people at the end of the zero protocol with a reserve between $1,800 and $5,000, that position is not equities. It is not real estate. It is not a business. It is debt reduction, specifically the elimination of the highest cost debt in the existing structure. The second law, the debt sequence. This is where the sequence law is most consistently violated. and where the violation is most defensible on the surface, which makes it the most dangerous. The argument against prioritizing debt elimination is familiar. The interest rate on the debt is 19%, but the market returns 10% annually, so the rational choice is to invest rather than repay. This argument is numerically coherent and structurally incorrect. The structural error is this: the debt is not just a cost. It is a position. It is someone else's position inside your financial structure. A creditor who has a legal and mechanical claim on a percentage of every dollar that enters your system. That claim does not disappear when you invest. It continues to compound on the side of the creditor. You are simultaneously building on two lots, one yours, one theirs, and the one they own is the one that is growing faster, because the interest rate on consumer debt is almost always higher than the net return on assets at this stage of accumulation. Rockefeller did not build Standard Oil by simultaneously funding a competitor's growth. He eliminated the competition first, systematically, completely. Then he deployed into expansion. The debt sequence is precise. Eliminate all consumer debt carrying an interest rate above 8%, in order from highest interest rate to lowest, using every dollar of structural margin produced each month. The minimum payments on all other debts are maintained. Every marginal dollar above those minimums goes to the highest rate position. This is not the avalanche method as self-help finance presents it, as a psychological strategy or a budget framework. It is a structural decision to remove a competing claim on your capital before that capital is deployed into your own position. The sequence is not negotiable because the mathematics of competing compounding do not care about your intentions or your investment thesis. For a person with $8,000 in consumer debt at 22% interest and a $400 per month margin, this stage takes approximately 20 months. The exact number will vary. The sequence does not vary. 20 months is not an abstraction. It is the time during which the foundation is being poured. The concrete is setting. The structure is not visible above the surface yet. This is where most people abandon the sequence, because the ground looks the same as it did when they started, and the visible evidence of progress is nothing. But the foundation is present. And a foundation that is present and invisible is structurally preferable to a wall that is visible and ungrounded. The third law, the compounding threshold. When the consumer debt above 8% is eliminated, the structural margin changes. This is the moment that most people at this stage fail to capture, because it arrives quietly without announcement and the previous habits of the structure move to absorb it before it can be redirected. The moment the last high-cost debt is eliminated, the structural margin increases by exactly the amount that was being paid to service that debt. If the minimum payment on the eliminated debt was $220 per month, the margin is now $220 per month larger. This is not a surplus. This is the first capital that is fully your own, not directed toward maintenance, not directed toward servicing a prior structural claim. This is the first dollar of genuine optionality in the sequence. The compounding threshold is the moment that dollar exists and is captured before the structure can absorb it. Capturing it means one thing. It moves immediately in the same month it first appears into a position with compound mechanics, not later. Not when the amount feels significant. In the month it first appears, because the behavior of the structure in that month determines the behavior of the structure in every subsequent month. This is the sequence law's final principle. The threshold must be crossed in real time, or the structure closes around it, and the threshold must be crossed again from a more difficult position. Rockefeller did not allow capital to sit idle between positions. The refinery threshold, which this channel examined earlier in the sequence, the point at which refinery capacity crosses from consumption to margin, is the same structural moment. The threshold is not a destination. It is a crossing point. You cross it once in real time, and the structure on the other side is different from the structure on this side. When the compounding threshold has been crossed, when the first dollar of non-obligated capital is moving into a compound-capable position, the sequence law has been satisfied. The foundation is poured. The walls are ready to begin. The third stage does not describe what the walls will look like. It describes what the first structural position is, the specific, measurable, non-abstract location where the compounding begins, and how to reach it from exactly where you are. That stage has the most weight of the three. It is called the foundation order. Total so far, 5,150 words. Act 3, the foundation order, will carry the remaining 1,800 to 2,000 words to bring the full script to the 6,500 to 7,000 word target at the depth and weight the brief specifies. Confirm when ready and I'll write Act 3 to close. A blueprint does not end with the foundation, but everything that follows it is determined by it. The foundation order is not the final stage because it is the most complex. It is the final stage because it is the most specific. The zero protocol cleared the site and proved the ground was stable. The sequence law determined what had to be removed before anything could be built. The foundation order names what gets built first. The exact structural position that transforms a margin and a reserve into a compounding system rather than a collection of isolated financial decisions with no load-bearing relationship to each other. Most people never reach this stage. Not because the zero protocol is too difficult, though it requires more honesty than most are prepared for. Not because the sequence law is too slow, though the timeline is longer than impatience can tolerate. They never reach it because they cannot stay in the sequence when the sequence is not yet producing anything visible. The ground looks the same at month 8 as it did at month 1. The ledger is cleaner. The debt is lower, but there is nothing to point to. Nothing that feels like wealth. That is the architecture of the foundation order. It is designed to be invisible until the moment it is not. And when it becomes visible, the compounding has already been running long enough that the position it has reached is not a beginning. It is a structure. The first structural position. The foundation order begins with a single non-negotiable structural decision. The first capital deployed into a compound-capable position must be placed where the structural return is maximized before taxation, not after. This is not a tax strategy. It is a sequencing decision with a structural consequence that compounds annually. For someone beginning this stage with no existing retirement accounts and a margin of $400 to $700 per month, which is where most people completing the sequence law will find themselves, the first structural position is a tax-advantaged retirement account funded to its annual limit before any other capital deployment occurs. The reason is mechanical, not philosophical. A dollar deployed inside a tax-advantaged account has a structural advantage over a dollar deployed outside of it that is equivalent in most cases to between 22 and 37 cents per dollar per year, the tax that does not leave the position. That retained capital compounds inside the structure alongside the principal. Over 10 years, the structural difference between a dollar inside this position and a dollar outside it is not incremental. It is foundational. The outside dollar is being taxed on every gain. The inside dollar is compounding on every gain, including the tax that was not paid. Rockefeller's model of control was not about maximizing gross revenue. It was about minimizing the structural loss between gross revenue and net position. The pipeline that lost the least in transit was not just more efficient. It was structurally superior in a way that compounded annually. Every barrel that did not leak was a barrel that compounded downstream. The tax-advantaged position is the first section of the pipeline with no leak. Fund it first. Fund it fully, then and only then direct remaining capital outward. The second structural position. When the tax-advantaged position is funded, not before, the second structural position is established. The second position is index-based market exposure in a taxable account at a contribution level that is consistent and automatic. Not a lump sum when the reserve feels large enough. Not a decision made monthly based on conditions. Automatic, consistent. A specific dollar amount leaves the account on a specific date every month and enters the position. The decision is made once. Then the mechanism runs. The reason for automation is not convenience. It is structural. A decision made monthly is made 12 times per year, and each of those 12 decisions is a point at which the sequence can be broken. By a market decline that creates hesitation, by a competing expense that creates justification, by a month in which the margin contracts and the contribution feels discretionary rather than structural. 12 points of potential failure per year compounding over a decade produce a structurally unreliable position. A decision made once, automated non-negotiable, is made one time. It produces 12 contributions per year with 0 points of failure. The structural difference between these two approaches over 15 years is not a difference in discipline. It is a difference in architecture. The specific index does not need to be named here. The principle is total market exposure at the lowest available cost. Expense ratios above 0.20% are a structural leak that does not need to exist. There are positions with expense ratios below 0.05%. The difference between 0.20 and 0.05, applied to $200 per month over 20 years, is not a rounding error. It is a structural decision about how much of the compounding belongs to the position and how much belongs to the structure that manages it. The cost of the structure that manages your capital is a competing claim on your capital. Minimize it. The sequence requires it. The load-bearing calculation. At this point in the foundation order, the structure exists. It is not large, but it is structurally sound in a way that no previous financial position in the viewer's life has been, because every element of it was placed in the correct sequence, on a foundation that was proven before weight was applied to it. Now the blueprint requires one specific calculation, not a projection, not an aspiration, a calculation. Take the total monthly contribution currently flowing into both structural positions, the tax-advantaged account and the automated index contribution. Multiply it by 12. That is the annual structural deployment. Apply a 7% average annual return, the long-term real return of diversified equity markets, net of inflation, which has held across every 30-year period in recorded market history. Project that number forward 15 years. The result is not a retirement figure. It is a proof of mechanism. It shows the viewer in specific dollars what the structure produces when left to run, not what might happen, not what could happen under favorable conditions, but what the arithmetic of consistent deployment into a compound-capable position produces when the sequence is followed and the structure is not interrupted. Most people who reach this calculation for the first time experience something they cannot immediately name. It is not excitement. It is not relief. It is the specific grounded weight of understanding that the structure is now larger than any single decision they will make inside it. The compounding is running. The position exists. The sequence has been followed. What happens next is not a matter of effort or discipline or market timing. It is a matter of not interrupting the mechanism. Rockefeller understood this as the central fact of his operation. Standard Oil did not require his daily intervention to produce profit. The structure produced the profit. He had designed the structure to run without him. His role after the structure was built was not to work harder inside it. It was to protect it from interruption and extend it where the architecture permitted. Your role after the foundation order is established is the same. Not to work harder, to protect the structure from the two interruptions that destroy most foundations at exactly this stage. The two interruptions. The first interruption is lifestyle expansion. When the debt is eliminated and the margin increases and the structural positions are funded and the account balances begin to reflect the accumulation. The structure of consumption that was compressed during the zero protocol and the sequence law begins to expand toward the new margin, not through dramatic decisions, through the accumulation of small ones, a subscription restored, a category of spending that was cut and is now being reconsidered, a standard of living that rises in proportion to the visibility of the balance. This is not a moral failure. It is the natural behavior of a financial structure that has never been trained to hold capital, only to process it. The structure defaults to its previous function the moment the pressure of the zero protocol is released. The defense against this interruption is not discipline applied at the point of spending. It is architecture applied before the margin is visible. Automate the structural positions before the increase in margin registers as available. The capital should be moving into the position before the mind has categorized it as optionality. This is not psychological manipulation. It is the same principle that makes automatic contribution superior to monthly decision. The sequence happens before the competing structure can respond. The second interruption is premature complexity. When the foundation order is running and the positions are funded and the balances are growing, there is a pull toward sophistication, toward individual stock selection, toward alternative assets, toward real estate at a leverage ratio the current reserve cannot support without structural risk, toward any of the positions that feel more active, more specific, more commensurate with the effort that has gone into reaching this stage. This pull is understandable. It is also structurally dangerous at this point in the sequence. The foundation order is not an endpoint. It is the first floor. The complexity that belongs on the second floor cannot be loaded onto the first floor before the first floor is weight rated for it. The structure will bear the load if the sequence is followed. It will not bear the load if the complexity is applied before the foundation is set. The specific threshold at which the foundation order can begin to bear additional structural weight, at which the second floor of the blueprint becomes a sequence possibility rather than a structural risk, is a net investable position of $25,000 held in compound-capable assets outside of emergency reserves. Below that threshold, the foundation is still setting. The concrete is still curing. no additional load. At $25,000, the foundation is load rated. What gets built on top of it is the subject of a different stage of the blueprint. That stage exists. The sequence that leads to it is the same sequence that led here. Examined ground, confirmed margin, no premature complexity. The blueprint does not end. It extends. Each stage is a floor. Each floor is possible only because the one beneath it was built in order. The blueprint has always existed. It existed before Rockefeller. It existed before Standard Oil. It existed before the ledger he kept in his black book with the first $3.57 of structural capital he had ever deliberately produced. The sequence is not a new argument. It is the arithmetic of structure, as fixed as the order in which concrete sets, as non-negotiable as the load a foundation must bear before the walls can rise. What changes is not the sequence. What changes is whether you know it. You know it now. The three stages have been named. The components have been specified. The thresholds are not abstract. They are measurable, and you can determine tonight where you are inside the sequence and what the next step is. Not the next goal, the next step. The one that comes before everything else. The one that if skipped means the thing built after it will not stand. The blueprint does not wait for you to be ready. It does not adjust for your timeline or your conditions or the particular difficulty of your starting position. It exists. It runs. The only variable, the only one that has ever mattered, is whether you are following it. The sequence is step one. Everything else is what gets built on top of it. The foundation does not care when you begin. It only requires that you begin in order.